Okay, good afternoon. And call to order of the City Planning Commission for September 6th. Can I get a confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been sent out?
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. Dean, can I have a roll call, please?
Before we go to roll call, Mr. Chair, I think we have a couple introductions that are in order. And at the City Commission's August 22nd meeting, they appointed 2 new members to the Planning Commission at that meeting. And to your right, we have Jerry Ivy, and this is his first meeting, so we'd like to welcome him. And then to your left, we have Doug Alt. This is his first meeting. We'd like to welcome him. Also would like to introduce 2 new staff planners that started within the last 2 weeks. We have Spencer Aiken here. He's over next to Margie, and then we have Haleen Burklow, who's also here. This is their first Planning Commission meeting. So with that, I will get to the roll call. Commissioner Farber. Commissioner Ivy.
Here.
Commissioner Jones. Here. Commissioner Waters.
Here.
Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Mike Sell.
Here.
Commissioner Alt.
Here.
Chair Hay.
Here.
So we have a board appointment of 8 members. 5 would be a quorum. We have 6 members present, so we have a quorum to conduct today's business. And we can move on with today's agenda.
Thank you, Dean. I'd like to get approval of the minutes for the August 16th, 2022 regular meeting.
So moved.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0, or 6-0, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll move into new business and public hearing items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a public hearing that is being continued from your August 2nd meeting, and this is a continuation of a public hearing on plans for developing Phase 2 of the River Run addition, which is located at the south end of Marymount Road, next to Great Life Golf and Fitness. And there are 2 applications associated with this. One is to request a change in zoning district classification from the current agricultural classification to a planned development district with R single-family zoning as the underlying request. And this is part of the request for creating an 11-lot residential subdivision on a 52.9 acre tract of land, which is located south of the existing River Run addition and directly west of the Great Life Fitness. So I think we'd be well served, Dustin, if we could start with the vicinity maps and work our way from there. So we have before you the public hearing on rezoning the remainder of this property. And in March of 2003, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on rezoning this entire tract, which at the time was 94 acres. And the request was to rezone and have a preliminary development plan for the full 94 acres. And there was, in that original plan, 83 residential building lots. So somewhere, Dustin, in those slides, we have the preliminary development plan that was presented to the Planning Commission in March of 2003. And so that plan looks like this, with north at the top, and this being Marymount Road, and this being the entrance off of Marymount Road, and you've got Great Life Golf and Fitness here. And the original concept was to bring River Run Parkway in as a boulevard here, the traffic circle with lots going to the south and to the north. And then there was a planned townhome area in this triangle here that abutted the Great Life Golf and Fitness. And then the rest of the plan wrapped around and came down to the lower area that's commonly referred to as the meadow. And if I recall correctly, at one time there was a sign out there that referred to this as Meadow Muffin Farm, but I'm not sure that is the correct name. But there was a barn down here, and there were horses that were raised on the property, and then this plan was put forward in 2003. Ultimately, because of the need for some off-site improvements, the development was scaled back so that the development essentially stopped here with phase 1 in the townhome area, and that was final platted as phase 1. The southern portion was left as unplatted and zoned agricultural, but it's important to understand that the original concept, the developer, Mr. Veneer, was proposing to develop the entire 94 acres and did submit a plan for that. As I noted, Mr. Veneer only platted the phase 1 area, which has 47 building lots plus the townhome area. And part of the reason for leaving the southern portion as agricultural was that allowed Mr. Veneer to defer the special assessments that were levied against the property, and as long as it was unplatted and zoned agricultural, those payments could be held off for 15 years. In 2010, perceiving a change in the market, Mr. Veneer came forward with an amended plan for the townhome area, and so he proposed a redesign of that area to go from townhomes to single-family home development, and constructed what is today a private street called Longfield Drive. So if you could scroll up a little bit, Dustin, we'll show you the Soul. So the original plan was, this is a townhome with 3 townhomes, or townhome building with 3 townhomes attached. The plan was to develop 10 of those townhomes, 3 dwelling units apiece, for a total of 30. Mr. Veneer perceived that there wasn't a sufficient market for that, so he reconfigured these lots, and ultimately only 1 townhome was built, and these were reconfigured into single-family home lots, and that was finalized in 2011. So Planning Commission reviewed that in 2010 and 11. The City Commission ultimately approved an ordinance that rezoned that from townhome to single family, and there was a private street named Longfield Drive that was developed there. At this point, River Run Estates LLC has been formed, and they have purchased the remaining unplatted portion of River Run, which is 23.74 acres plus 3 platted lots next to the townhome area in the original. So where Dustin is pointing there, those were also purchased and incorporated into the phase 2 area. And so they have filed an application to rezone this property to a planned development district with R as the underlying zoning district for the purpose of a large lot residential subdivision that differs substantially from the master plan that was approved in 2003. And so along with that application is a preliminary development plan, or plat, which is item B, that proposes a realignment and extension of Overlook Drive and to serve 11 lots. So it's helpful to understand that the original master plan called for 36 single-family lots in phase 2. This plan is proposing 11 lots instead of the 36, and this portion does not extend any street or development wrapping around into this lower area. So it's essentially cut the street off here that formerly on the original plan came down like this, and instead of 36 lots, It cut it back to 11. And so we've summarized for you on page 7 of your report the development standards for the R district. And the plan development district process allows you as the planning commission to create a customized zoning district for a proposed development, which allows you to address limitations and things related to lot size, setback, and other bulk and density regulations. Because of the size of these lots, staff believes that some consideration should be given to increasing the side yard setback requirement from 7.5 feet to either 15 or 25 feet due to the anticipated size of the homes and the need for fire separation. So one of the aspects of the fire code is if you have increased required separation between dwellings, then you can reduce some of the fire flow requirements for your subdivision because the large separation reduces the risk of fire spread. So River Run Estates LLC believes that this property is uniquely suited for residential development, that this will offer lifestyle and economic attributes and housing styles that are not currently available in Salina. And obviously they believe the agricultural zoning inhibits the use of the property. And so one thing that makes this property very unique compared to the flatter portions of Salina is this has a great deal of slope and some dramatic elevation changes and some dramatic views. So if you're at the entrance to the subdivision, you're approximately 1250 above sea level. That elevation rises to about 60 feet along Overlook Drive and then drops down to 1,240 feet at the lower end of Overlook Drive. And along the river, the elevations are in the neighborhood of 1230. So from the high point to the low point in the subdivision, there's about 80 feet of elevation change, and that is very unique in Salina. And so because of that, the original street system and lot layout conformed with and utilized the existing topography, meaning that when they developed Phase 1, there was no massive grading or regrading. And the developers of Phase 2 have now modified their layout to more closely conform with the natural topography than their very original layout. And so some of the wooded slopes and ravines that were originally designated as common area, they are now proposing to designate as conservation easements on some of the individual building lots in Phase 2. There will still be some need for grading and reshaping to create level building sites here in Phase 2. But if you look at the physical characteristics of the property, its proximity to Marymount Road, its proximity to public utilities, which have enabled this property to be served, the applicant believes this is suitable for some form of residential zoning and development, and it appears to be a logical extension of the original River Run concept. So this is really kind of an isolated development. There's not bordered by subdivisions on all sides. You've got some rural estate type homes on the west side of Marymount Road. You have Great Life Golf and Fitness. You have a city-owned property that's vacant to the south, and then you have the river. So it'd be very hard-pressed to say, other than the original part of River Run, that this development would have any impact on adjacent or nearby properties. And so if you look to future zoning and land use, the type of residential development that River Run LLC or Estates LLC is proposing would be consistent with the development that's already occurred in River Run. And so for public utilities and services, I don't know if you can turn on the utility layer, Dustin, but one of the original challenges for River Run is that it's kind of at the end of a system, And so there was a water line that was extended from what was then Mariposa Drive, now Cedar Ridge Drive, down Marymount and into the subdivision. And this is an 8-inch line. And even as early as when this was originally proposed in 2003, there was identified need for an additional off-site water line connection to provide 2 sources of flow and better fire protection. And so there was an annexation agreement between the City of Salina and Veneer Properties, and that agreement obligates the City of Salina to design and construct a looped water line connection to provide a second source of water supply to River Run, and it obligates property owners in River Run to participate in a benefit district. So the agreement sets out that River Run homeowners would pay 1/3 of that cost. The city and future users would pay 2/3 of the cost. The timing of the design, the construction of this water line is not within these developers' control. And so the City of Salina, through the Utilities Director, is responsible to identify and choose the preferred route of this water line and to acquire the necessary easements. So the applicant and their engineers proposing to extend this existing water line down into the Phase 2 area, and that will provide domestic service and fire protection to those lots. However, due to the anticipated home sizes and the existing fire flows in Phase 1, staff has determined that no vertical construction can occur in this phase until that looped connection is in place. So before they can begin infrastructure work, they can do grading and shaping and installation, they can put in foundations, but before they can vertically construct a new home in this phase, that water line connection will need to be in place. As far as sanitary sewer, because of the elevation drop, the applicant's design engineer originally proposed to construct a sewer lift station to serve the lots at the lower end. That's been discussed with the applicants and their design engineer, and they're now proposing just to install a public gravity line system that will serve the upper lots, and then the lower lots will have their own ejector pumps that will pump into this gravity line. The plan for designing and constructing a public or private lift station has been abandoned. That is a good situation for everybody, because the city didn't want to have and be responsible for maintaining another lift station. The developers obviously don't want to be in a position where they're having to maintain a private lift station, so having individual ejector pumps in those homes, I think, is a win for everybody. As far as storm drainage, it's fairly simple. Everything drains to the river, and so their plan is to direct runoff to Overlook Drive and then have a conveyance from Overlook Drive into the old Smoky Hill River channel, which is right here, the cutoff channel. So the stormwater will go into this channel, and then it will go into the Smoky Hill River. So this wooded ravine right here is the old Smoky Hill River channel, which used to have a bend through here, and so they'll direct runoff to this, and then it will go from there into the main river channel. As far as emergency services and fire protection, emergency response would be from Station 4 at Marymount and Crawford, and obviously they're already serving the existing homes in this area and the Great Life Clubhouse. And then this area lies within the Meadowlark, Lakewood Middle School, and Central High enrollment areas. There are underground gas and electric lines in Phase 1 that can be extended into this area. As far as the condition of roads leading to this subdivision, Marymount Road was improved to city standards as part of a benefit district project in 2004, and that provides the primary access to this. So as we look at density, the general rule of thumb is that low density is typically in the range of 4 to 8 units per acre. In the comprehensive plan, it refers to 2 to 5 units per acre if you're strictly single-family homes. The proposed density here is 0.46 units per acre. We're talking about 11 home sites on 23 acres, so the density is very, very low, almost a rural estates type density. So we have outlined for you on page 11 of the zoning report some possible findings that we think could be made in support of rezoning this for residential use. And the first one is that the physical attributes of the property and the available public utilities make it suitable for residential development once a second source of water supply is provided. This is in a primary service area for the city on the urban service area map, and we have long-term expectations to extend utilities and services into this Phase 2 area. This could be viewed as allowing similar residential development of property that's contiguous with an already developed subdivision. It's a logical extension of what exists in Phase 1. This area is served by a perimeter street that meets city street standards, and the density being proposed here is certainly consistent with the suburban residential land use designation. So we have provided some alternatives for you on page 12 of your report. And the first one is that you could recommend approval of the request for R single-family zoning subject to a 25-foot side yard setback requirement being imposed and subject to satisfactory platting of the property into individual building lots. Another option would be to recommend a lesser change to RS, residential suburban zoning, subject to a 25-foot side yard setback requirement and to satisfactory platting of the property. Dustin, somewhere in there and in your packets is a table that I provided that just shows the difference between R and RS, and this is really subject to input from the applicants, but as we looked at this, and you look at the requirements, the city has an RS, which is a residential suburban district for rural estates type development, and so their minimum width for that district is 100 feet instead of 70. All of these lots are more than 100 feet wide. The minimum lot size in RS is 1 acre as compared to 8,500 square feet. The front yard building setback from the front property line is 50 feet instead of 30, and the side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks are slightly above the lot coverage, and the dwelling height are the same. But subject to input from the applicant, RS is an alternative that you could approve. It probably more closely reflects the character of what they're trying to accomplish, but it does require a 50-foot front setback instead of 30, so we'd want to hear from the applicant on that. You could recommend that consideration of this rezoning request be postponed to allow the applicant or staff to provide additional information or to allow revisions to be made to the proposed plat layout before consideration of this rezoning request. Or you could recommend denial of this rezoning request provided appropriate findings are made. If you were to recommend denial, that means you're viewing this as being appropriate for agricultural instead of residential use. So as I noted, as we looked at this more closely, even though the R is what was applied for, the RS, residential suburban, probably more accurately reflects the density and character that's being proposed. As we noted, the main distinction is how far back the homes have to be from the street, 50 feet instead of 30. If the applicant concurs that that more accurately reflects their vision, then we would recommend approval of PDD-RS zoning subject to the imposition of a 25-foot side yard setback requirement and subject to satisfactory platting of the 52.90 acre Phase 2 area. So with that, staff would be open to any questions about the zoning land use side of this. We'll get into the plat layout as part of item 3.1B, but hopefully the applicants have had time to read the report and reflect on those distinctions, and they would obviously welcome their input on what they think the most appropriate underlying zoning classification should be. So with that, I'd be open to any questions commissioners might have.
Okay, any questions for staff? Dean, I just got one. You were talking earlier about the putting in the water line, that a third of the cost will be shared. Is that a third of the cost to be shared by the 100 units that are already there?
It's
In the River Run Addition?
It's shared by the River Run subdivision in its entirety. So just for your benefit, this area has been assessed, this Phase 2 area has been assessed for a portion of Marymount Road and a portion of the water line coming down Marymount Road. And so I don't know if you can go back to the aerial photo, Dustin, but I'll try to walk through what the Director of Utilities is looking at. So we'll have to zoom out a little bit, Dustin. We'll have to keep zooming out. So the Director of Utilities is envisioning that there would be a line that would here, and it would extend in some alignment over to a 16-inch line in Markley Road. So if we look at the cost of that line, 2/3 of the cost would be paid for by the city of Salina, with hopefully the ability to recover some of that cost from beneficiaries should this area develop, and then 1/3 of that cost would be spread over the River Run properties.
Okay, I think I'm lost on, so what is the benefit for the owners who live in River Run now to pay 1/3 of the cost to put in a water line for the for whatever is below them?
Enhanced fire flows and a second source of water supply.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions for staff? Mr. Lee, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Dean, you mentioned a conservation easement. Remember right? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, we'll get into that in more detail in the plat, because right now we're focusing on the zoning, but the distinction is that a common area is an area that is held in common ownership by the association. It's owned and managed in common by all property owners in River Run. A conservation easement is a private restriction that's put on a privately held tract of land, whereby a portion of that land is protected from development and preserved in its natural state, but it belongs to and would be conveyed with the property. So it's under the management and control of the individual lot owner, as opposed to being jointly owned and controlled. And so the best example in my experience that I've had is on Upper Mill Heights Drive, that's north of Crawford. There's 2 homes there on the east side, one that was built by Dr. Ray House and one that was built by Dr. D'Souza, and then there's a 3rd lot there that was platted, and there's a conservation easement on that 3rd lot, and so it is designed and intended, it's privately held by both of them, but it's designed and intended to be left in its state. So if they would sell their homes, those rights would transfer, and it would be jointly held by whoever owns those in the future. So if you have a lot, and you have a lot with a conservation easement on it, and you sell that, you're selling and including the portion that's conservation easement restricted. So, Dustin, I'm not getting my bearings on this drawing, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, but there's an access easement on this drawing that we'll be getting into in the next, it's down towards the lower left. So if and we'll discuss this in the next item, but this is proposed as an access easement for members of the River Run Association to get access down to the lower level. And so I guess now it's been moved to here, but there would be a path, and there would be the ability to have a piece of machinery, a mower, small tractor, pedestrians to be able to get from the street into this lower common area where they have trails. When an individual sells Lot 4, they are selling that subject to this recorded access easement. So that access easement runs with the land. The same thing would hold true of a conservation easement. A conservation easement would run with the land, but it would be transferred owner to owner and would not be part of a common association. So that would be the primary difference.
Okay, if there's no more questions for staff, the applicant, step forward. Mr. Lee.
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Lee. I'm here to represent River Run Estates, LLC. Thank you for having us today.
Okay.
And we're primarily interested in your thoughts on the underlying. So this would just come into play when residential building permits were applied for, and it's just a matter of which standard we would apply when permits came in. So if you are more comfortable with the 30-foot setback and those parameters, then the R district would be the right thing. If you're planning as part of your development that all the homes would be set back 50 feet or more anyway, then perhaps the RS might more closely fit the Phase 2 area.
And we do prefer the R designation, and the primary reason being that the 50-foot front yard setback on some of the corner lots could be tough, as well as a 30-yard setback on some of the east. 5 feet probably won't make a difference, but we certainly prefer the R. Also on side yard setback, as Dean mentioned, we had talked about between 15 and 25 feet, and in our design review document, we are going to specify that if it's 2.4 acres or more, it's a 25-foot setback. If it's less than 2.4 acres, a 15-foot side yard setback, both of which would exceed either of these. But again, we want to make sure that the homes are properly spaced, both for aesthetics and, of course, fire protection. And again, to build on the conservation easement, the idea being simply that you can't build a structure there. There is no third-party conservator, as may sometimes be implied under the name conservation easement. I know that has come up. This would simply be owned by the landowner and be retained as nature, and you would not build a structure on it.
So what he's describing is that in the agricultural context sometimes, or in Kansas, we have organizations like the Nature Conservancy or things like that, that a landowner could put their property in a conservation easement that would be essentially in the hands of a third party. And so we're not talking about people turning over portions of their lot to a third party or a different entity. It's just a restriction that says we will not issue permits or anything that would involve structures or construction activity within a conservation easement.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So it sounds like their preference is for the originally applied for R single-family residential.
Correct.
Okay. If there's no more for staff or the applicant, is there any public comment?
We do not have anyone on Zoom at the moment, so any
Okay.
public comment would come from the room.
If you please state your name and address for the,
Morris Soderberg, 1628 Overlook Drive in Phase 1. I'm not opposed to the development whatsoever. However, there are some questions I think that need to be answered before you proceed with it. The other night, they had a meeting, I think it was a week ago tomorrow, indicated that, or told us that the construction entrance they hoped would be where the emergency entrance is, but they had to get approval from the city. Seems to me we maybe went through that same procedure with another development over by the municipal golf course, where they only had one entrance into the development. I just think that question needs to be answered, and if they bring that heavy construction equipment through Phase 1, there will be a whole bunch of tree damage that have been growing for 15 to 20 years, and also the roads, I'm not sure, or the streets will handle it. I believe, and I walk up there every morning, there's a survey sign that indicates there's lots 11 and 12. Every plat I've seen has 11. Now, I don't know if that may be a surveyor's that problem, but anyway, somebody ought to check that. It concerned me when I looked at it.
You're referring to whether this phase has 11 lots or 12 in it? The question is how many lots are in this
We were
phase?
told 11.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. I think it's probably a surveyor's error, but there is a surveyor's stake which says a corner lot of 11 and 12.
Okay.
Another concern I have is for the walking path they have from between lots 3 and 4, I believe. You indicated a small tractor. You need to see what size the tractor is the farmer brings and the equipment he brings to harvest the hay in the meadow. It's not a small tractor, and I don't know how wide it needs to be. I think he told me 18 foot or something or other. But if it's going to be hayed every year, it's going to be, have to have a road to get down there.
Right now, the proposed access easement is 15 feet wide, 7.5 feet on each of the lots. So it would be a question of what equipment could be accommodated within that 15-foot space.
That's my question, yes, correct.
Yeah.
What happens to taxes and liability insurance on the easements, or the conservation easements? Are there
Well,
property taxes on that?
As a general rule of thumb, portions that are restricted in a conservation easement are right now, if a property is designated as common area, does not have a taxable value. That value is attributed to the rest of the property, or for example, if you have a subdivision that has a stormwater detention pond in it, the stormwater detention pond has a 0 value, but the appraiser will assign a nominal value to the individual lots based on the benefit from that pond, or they would look at the walking paths here, and they would attribute some value to that, but they would assign it to the individual lots. So the lots are going to be subject to property tax, but the portion that's conservation easement would be considered to have no value for development, similar to a detention pond easement or something like that.
So do I read that the association doesn't pay those taxes that's on the lots that they're developing?
Yes, the conservation easement is on the individual lots, and it has nothing to do with the association.
Thank you.
Dustin, I might have you get out of this and go to the general aerial photo and go over to Magnolia Hills Estates between Markley and Magnolia. And I think we might be able to address Mr. Soderberg's concern by explaining what we did there. But in the case, if we can get there, of the Magnolia Hills Estates development, there were similar concerns of the people in the Phase 1 area that as the subdivision developed to the east, they requested that the construction equipment for putting the infrastructure in Phase 2 and not go through the streets in the subdivision. So because it was a city-administered project, we worked with the developers, and so basically they had a construction equipment road that came from Holmes Road, and so as they were building the streets and putting in the water and sewer lines, the construction equipment and trucks were coming off of Holmes Road instead of through the subdivision. So since we're going to be involved in the infrastructure installation in Phase 2, we can try to work out a similar arrangement where the infrastructure and the heavy equipment and the trucks are coming through the emergency access easement instead of coming through the main entrance to the subdivision.
Has anyone talked to Great Life about that, do you know?
That will require some conversations with Great Life to make that happen.
That road will have to be rebuilt. It's in bad shape already. So.
Yeah, so there would have to be permission obtained to do that, but that option is available subject to working something out with Great Life.
And
That would be the preferred option, but it's Great Life's road. That's not a public street, so it would have to be worked out with them.
And if that's not an option, what do we do?
Then the equipment's going to have to carefully come through the Phase 1 entrance.
No way they can come through carefully, let me tell you. Okay, something to look at. The water line, that was news to us. That was not announced to us at a meeting last week, that any of Phase 1 is going to be responsible for one-third of that, or for a part of one-third of that water line. We were told we were going to get increased water pressure, and the water line was coming from Markley Road. So I'd need a little explanation on why that turned out to be tacked on to the old Phase 1. That doesn't seem quite right that we would have to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so, Mr. Lee?
Can I respond?
Yes.
So, again, just to run through some of those questions, Mr. Soderberg, on the construction entrance, yes. Obviously, we need to have a conversation with Mr. Pestinger, but provided he's okay with it, yes, our intention is to build that up and have that be a construction entrance for any heavy equipment coming through to minimize any impact on Phase 1. It is 11 lots. That was a surveyor mistake. You'll note it goes from Lot 9 to 10 to 12. They skipped 11, but it is just 11 lots as presented here. Can you bring up the preliminary plat proposal so we can look at that trail again? Originally, the walking trail connection, that easement for access, was put between lots 4 and 5. When you went to walk that, there was some pretty steep terrain, very similar to what's there right now. There's kind of a makeshift road they've put in that people use. And in between lot 3 and 4, there's a very natural low point. You can see it's probably the most easy progression of decrease in elevation. It also creates a longer path. So if we're putting one path in, it does create the easiest path. I have walked up and down that. It's a very, very simple path to do. I mean, there's some elevation, but it's not a hard path at all, and you can tell vehicles have even kind of made their own path there as people have driven up and down it. Our intention with going to the 15-foot trail versus the previous 10 was based on feedback, I believe it was Mr. Ritz, to go wider to make sure we can accommodate a tractor, and if that needs to be more than 15, by all means. Every step along the way, we've been more than accommodating to everybody in Phase 1 on what it is that we can do to be the best neighbors that we can. So if that needs to be wider, we certainly will, and we can talk about what gravel needs to exist, make sure that that grade is, it certainly is accessible by tractors that I've driven. Easements, again, yes, those are part of the parcel. Yes, the homeowner would have the liability and the insurance on that easement area. Again, it's an area to remain nature that they can't build a structure on. covered the construction entrance. The water line, we did not mean to misrepresent that. We had a meeting last Wednesday and invited everybody from Phase 1 and said, here was the original plat, here was the green space in the plat, basically cliffside, and a little space on the east side. That is going away. We understand everybody's concerned about view, so we're going to protect that view by creating this conservation easement where nothing can be built beyond a certain point. In addition, we agreed that what's shown on there as conservation easement is now something that we're going to gift to the HOA to be common space that continues a common space they already have, because it's a space that is commonly used. Versus, again, what's left out of the original common space is primarily cliffside that would not be usable, nor do we believe anybody wants to build a home if they choose to build close to that edge and then have people right below them, especially climbing up a cliffside right below their home. That probably not preferable. The water line, it was our impression that that was our expense as Phase 2. So if that is more than that, I believe when the question came up, the answer that I gave everybody in Phase 1 is that as far as we know, there is nothing that gets attached to Phase 1. That was the information we had at that time. If that's not correct, certainly that's our error, but our understanding was that the water line was 1/3 was ours to cover. But again, however that works out is how it works out, but that was our understanding, so there was no misrepresentation intended there. It is worth noting, again, we went through both the plat originally and what we're proposing. Again, the HOA, which I'm sure is going to come up on the next item, so I won't get into it, but if we were to go submit and receive votes, we did ask everybody whether they preferred the original plat or what we have proposed. 44 were represented in total, and 43 said, yes, we prefer what you guys are doing. And again, we did that not because we had to, because the HOA is controlled by one individual, but rather because we are trying to be good neighbors and answer these questions and do what we can to make it something everybody is excited about and nobody's upset about. So above and beyond, I really think we've gone. Does that answer your questions? Okay.
I guess my only concern still is the 1/3 of the water line, expecting the Phase 1 to pay that 1/3. I mean, it kind of sounds like to me that, it may not have been misrepresented, but was not made clear to Phase 1 that they were going to be the Phase 1 people were going to be responsible for 1/3 of that water line going in for that Phase 2. And that's probably my only concern right now, is that the homeowners in that Phase 1, coming up with that, knowing now that they're responsible for 1/3 of the water line that's going to be put into that development.
And I would say, no matter which development we did, if that is the case, that is certainly the case. Whether we were to put in 36 lots plus the townhomes and have 40-some more homes go in, or whether we were to put 11 homes in either case, that water line has to get built before Phase 2 can go vertical. And how we're platting it does not change what anybody's responsibility there is.
And just for everybody's information, that is not a zoning or a plating issue. The fairness or non-fairness of the assessment, I will just point out that in 2003, an annexation agreement was negotiated between the City of Salina and Mr. Veneer, and that annexation agreement was recorded in the Registered Deeds office before a single lot was sold. And the purpose of recording the annexation agreement was so that people who purchase lots in River Run would have an opportunity to know about that potential future obligation.
So this was something that was in place before?
It was in place in 2003. It was in place before any Phase 1 property owner bought a lot. That doesn't mean that they were informed. That doesn't mean that they had knowledge, but it was recorded in the deeds office so that a potential purchaser could have knowledge, and it was put in place. It's not a recent requirement. It was a requirement in 2003, and it was recorded in the deeds office so that it would be picked up, or could be picked up as part of the chain of title.
Okay. Any other questions?
Excuse me, do we know what that cost would be for those, that 1/3? What's that going to run for that original?
Well, it would, we just had a rough estimate of $100 a running foot, 3,120 feet. So you're looking at something in the order of $300,000, 2/3 of which would be picked up by the city, 1/3 would be picked up by River Run, divided by the total area, which in this case is reduced down because of the common area. But it would either, that 1/3 would either be through the creation of a benefit district, either be the sole obligation of Lot 2 buyers, or it could be distributed between the Lot 1 owners and the Phase 2 owners. But it would either be equal per lot, or it would be assessed by area. But we're looking at like 41 acres in Phase 1 and 23 acres in Phase 2, so it would be that 1/3 share divided either by the number of lots or divided by the acreage. But we have a rough idea of what it would cost, but all of that would be worked out when the benefit district is ready to be formed for that water line.
And one more question, does the, that new water line, does it give the original ones in Part 1 any better service or water pressure or anything like that?
Absolutely, because and part of that was ameliorated when the Cedar Ridge addition was done, and there was a water line that fed in from the Cedar Ridge addition from the east. But if this water line coming in on River Run Parkway breaks, there is no water in River Run and no source of water for the subdivision at all. If it is connected to a second source coming over from Markley Road, then it's going to have two sources of flow. And so if there's a break or a shut off somewhere, there will be a second means to feed that. That was recognized in 2003. Nobody believed it would take this long to get to the point of having that second connection designed and built, but no one in 2003 thought it would be 2022 when Phase 2 happened. We thought it was going to happen very quickly after Phase 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would add the fire hydrant flows are roughly 940 to 1,000 gallons per minute on the latest readings in Phase 1. And at least in Phase 2, for the size of homes we're talking about, need to be somewhere north of 2,000 gallons per minute. So it would be a significant difference in water pressure for Phase 1, not just in water pressure, but in the ability to put out a structure fire. Big benefit. Also worth noting, there is not a second emergency entrance to Phase 1, and that would be another benefit when we build out, is that there will now be temporarily used for construction, but hopefully eventually a second emergency entrance, so that if the main entrance were blocked, an emergency vehicle could get through.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sir, did you have a question? Okay. Okay, so if there's no more questions for staff, no more questions for the applicant, and no more public comment, I'll bring it back to commission for,
I would, as to 3.1A, I would refer you back to page 12 of your staff report, which it has Planning Commission alternatives. The first one being the R single-family zoning, and Mr. Lee expressed a preference for their original request, which would be to have the R district as their underlying zoning. And as we pointed out, that has a 30-foot front setback as opposed to 50 in RS. And Mr. Lee expressed a preference for option 1, which would be the R zoning. Of course, you have the option of postponing consideration to obtain additional information or allow revisions to be made, or recommending denial of the request, but as to between alternatives 1 and 2, the applicants have expressed a desire for alternative 1.
Okay.
Well, that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'd make a recommendation that we approve application PDD 03-1D with the PDDR designation.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That passes 6-0. That moves us on to application PD 0-4D.
So this is the companion application, and this deals with the nitty-gritty of the layout of the subdivision. And so as we look to this, we'll point out that we have the application that was submitted. After the application, Mr. Lee alluded to a neighborhood meeting that was held on Wednesday, August 31st in 2022. He sent an email to staff that summarized what occurred at that neighborhood meeting on the 31st of August, and so that is next to the application. The next item in your packet is the surveyed legal description of the Phase 2 portion that's going to be developed, and the next item is a survey of the common area that is down along the Smoky Hill River Channel, with the caveat that a portion of that, I think approximately where line L7 is on that, right in here, there's going to be, on the final plat, an extended finger right here of common area that will come in behind the lots on the ridge. And so there was a master plan, as I indicated, for this area. This is an amendment to that plan, and the amendment is to shorten Overlook Drive and to reduce the number of lots proposed from 36 to 11 residential building lots. In July of 2003, the Planning Commission approved a final plat of the Phase 1 area, and that approval was made subject to 10 conditions. Condition number 5 had to do with the recording of a covenant consenting to the establishment of a benefit district, obligating the land within the development for 1/3 of the total cost of an off-site water line connection, and that was in fact done and recorded. And so we have summarized for you how those items have been complied with. And so the City Commission concurred with those dedications and the maintenance responsibility. All the streets in Phase 1 are public and are proposed to be public in Phase 2. Those were constructed and financed through a creation of a benefit district. There were 47 residential building lots platted in Phase 1, plus the townhome area. And as I noted, that was replatted into individual home sites in 2011. So River Run Estates LLC, Mr. Lee and North MacArthur, has purchased the remainder of River Run, except for the 29+ acre common area down along the river, which is still owned by Veneer Properties. They filed this application requesting approval of an amended plat for the second phase of River Run. And this area would be platted and known as River Run Estates. The original layout showed 36 platted lots. River Run LLC, or Estates LLC, is proposing to create 11 estate-size lots for new single-family home construction. So of the 52 acres, 29 acres plus some additional area would be left as as common area. An extension of Overlook Drive would provide access to the new lots. The length of Overlook Drive is reduced under the revised plat, but the street right-of-way and utilities would be public in Phase 2 as they were in Phase 1. So on page 4, 5, and 6, and 7, I just want to quickly go over one of the reasons this was postponed at your August 2nd meeting was to allow for a number of unresolved plating issues to be addressed. Staff believes that these items have now been addressed and the plat is ready for your consideration. The first item dealt with a Evergy power line that crisscrosses this property, apparently without any form of easement, and it impedes the development of Phase 2. And so there will need to be a rerouting of the source of power for the irrigation pumps and a power line route to those pumps, and that will be the responsibility of Great Life Golf and Fitness. And we have a cost estimate of about $34,000 from Evergy to reroute that electric line. Originally, the applicants were proposing to relocate the existing emergency access easement, the access road and gate. And upon further reflection, they've decided to keep it where it was. And so we do think that based on the terrain and the way that everything's set up at Great Life Fitness and the fact that we have an existing pathway there, that leaving it in its present location is a positive thing. So that has been addressed. We've clarified that the electric transformers will be located in the front of the lots. Evergy has no interest in trying to put transformers in the rear area of any portion of these lots. The terrain and the trees and everything is just too rugged, so the transformers will be out in front as they are in Phase 1. The applicant is proposing the same right-of-way profile in Phase 2. One of the things we pointed out was that the length of the dead-end street on the original plan was a little over 2,900 feet. That has been reduced to 2,370 feet, which still exceeds the 600-foot maximum cul-de-sac length, but actually does shorten the length of that road that begins at Marymount and extends to the cul-de-sac on Overlook Drive. The plan is to maintain a 50-foot right-of-way, 29 feet of paving, and having sidewalks on only one side of the street, which replicates the profile in Phase 1. We wanted clarification of who would own the lift station, who would own and maintain the force main. Are they forming a separate HOA to maintain that lift station? And the response to that is that the lift station concept has been abandoned, and instead the lower lots 4, 5, 6, and 7 will have their own ejector pumps, and the remainder of the lots 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10, and 11 will be served by a gravity sewer line, and so there's no need to discuss a sewer lift station. It was a little unclear, and even in my own report, I still didn't get it right, but there wasn't a clear access point to the lower level meadow common area, and so the revised layout shows a 15-foot wide access and walking trail easement, and it should say between lots 3 and 4. My report says lots 4 and 5, but that was the old location. But depending on the ultimate final width, that is designed and intended to allow not only people, but also machinery, small tractors, to reach the lower level to perform cutting or mowing or maintenance. We identified a couple lots on the original layout that appeared to be problematic in terms of buildable area due to the severe slopes. particularly the original proposed Lot 3. In response, the applicant's design engineer shifted the alignment of Overlook Drive to the east to more closely align with the terrain and more closely align with the existing gravel roadway. And by shifting that roadway slightly to the east, it's resulted in more level area being provided on the west side of the street. So we've moved the road from somewhere in here to over here, and as a result, we have more flat area on this side than we did, which provides an area to place a house on that's not subject to severe slopes. As we pointed out, there was an annexation agreement and a covenant not to protest that's recorded in the Register of Deeds office, and it obligates the city of Salina to design and construct a looped water line to provide 2 sources of water supply to River Run, and it obligates the property owners in River Run to participate in a benefit district. What that ultimate participation will be worked out through a benefit district process and is not part of today's action. As I noted, the city will be responsible for identifying and choosing the preferred route and acquiring the necessary easements. And so the Director of Utilities has performed fire flow tests on the lines in Phase 1, and they are adequate for the homes that are there, but not adequate to allow any new construction in Phase 2. As you move away from the entrance, you have reduced flows due to friction loss and terrain. So as you move into the subdivision, the fire flows gradually decrease as you get to the end of the system. And so this looped connection will increase the fire flows and also provide a backup source of water to the subdivision. In 1993, there was discussion about running a line down to Magnolia Road, but the Director of Utilities has expressed a preference to go over to Markley Road, thinking that will be more beneficial to a larger area. One thing we were seeking to confirm was whether this was going to be part of the original Articles of Incorporation bylaws and covenants. The original Articles of Incorporation bylaws and covenants covered the entire area, the 94 acres comprising the River Run property, and we were trying to clarify whether this group was going to form their own association or have their own articles, and we have confirmed that the existing Articles of Incorporation bylaws and covenants will stand, and there are no plans for the Phase 2 area to have a separate and independent association. So when the Planning Commission looks at a new subdivision, the subdivision regulations require for you to look at the adequacy of the perimeter street or the direct access perimeter street. In this case, that perimeter street is South Marymount Road. It also directs you to look at the need for additional emergency access points into the subdivision. So the subdivision regulations require 1 direct access point, which we have, River Run Parkway, and then the new subdivisions will have any additional means of access in and out of the subdivision, either by direct street connection or indirectly, as are determined necessary by the Planning Commission. And so the original River Run was approved before this text amendment and before the current version of the fire code, but nonetheless, in 2003, the Planning Commission required that there be an emergency access road constructed at the south end of Overlook Drive as it ends today, and that emergency access road connects to the Great Life Golf and Fitness parking lot. And so this access point's about 1,370 feet away from the public street entrance, and this emergency access point was included in the property that the applicants have purchased, but they are planning to leave it in place. There's only 11 lots proposed on Phase 2, but if this is approved, there are 64 dwelling units approved for Phase 1, so the total number of dwelling units served by River Run Parkway would be 75 dwellings. And so we believe that the public street access from Marymount Road plus the secondary emergency access, which is remote from the main entrance, does conform with the subdivision regulations in terms of providing a secondary means of access into the subdivision in emergency. And so, as I noted, the plan is to design Overlook Drive to be just like Overlook Drive in the original subdivision. As with the original subdivision, there will need to be some planning done to accommodate all the utilities who all want to be in front. So a lot of new subdivisions will have electric, phone, and cable in the back, and gas and water and sewer in the front. Here we're going to have gas, water, sewer, electric, phone, and cable all in the front. So that means that we're going to be looking at supplemental utility easements in the front yard to accommodate all those utilities to fit out in that front area. And then the other aspect relating to this property is two variations that the developers are requesting. One is a variance to the maximum length of a dead-end street, and the second variance is a variance to the requirement that sidewalks be constructed on both sides of a public street. So in this case, the developers are requesting the Planning Commission to approve a variation to allow the Overlook Drive cul-de-sac to be 2,370 feet in length measured from the entrance to the subdivision, if we look at River Run Parkway as well. I wanted to point out that when 2003, when this was first looked at, we actually measured the entrance as being the intersection of Marymount Road with Cedar Ridge Drive. And when the Cedar Ridge development was done, the city required that this street, which doesn't look significant, Edgewood Drive, be constructed. And so what that does is allows us not to count this as part of the dead end, that there's an alternate way to get in to this area from this direction. And so there's more than one way to get to the subdivision entrance. So there are a number of factors that you're supposed to look at, and that the street length will not be detrimental to the public safety, health, or welfare, that the reason for the variation is based on conditions that are unique to the property for which the variation is sought and not generally applicable to other property, because of the particular physical surrounding shape or topographical conditions of the specific property. A hardship to the owner would result if the strict letter of the 600-foot limitation was carried out, and the variation will not in any manner vary the provisions of the zoning regulations, ordinance, comprehensive plan. So if you look at this property, it truly is unique because of its landlocked nature and the shape and topography of the site. And it's bordered on the south by the old river channel. It's bordered on the west by the existing Smoky Hill River. The plans to construct a bridge on Cloud Street were abandoned 50 years ago, and there's no plan to span the river on Cloud Street, so this property is cut off on the west. We have Great Life Golf and Fitness on the eastern boundary. That leaves only the Marymount frontage as a potential street access to the site. And the choice of access points is further limited by the drainage channel and pond just east of Marymount. So if you've driven that area, the point at which you can enter this property is pretty well fixed to where it is. There's not a lot of choices to get multiple points of ingress into this property. If you measure from north to south, this property is 3,100 feet north to south. And so the developer was very limited into how he could lay out streets and lots on the developable portion of this property. A third extenuating factor was the city's approval of the Mariposa Master Plan. And so if some of you have resided here for a long time, you know that Cloud Street used to come straight down along the north edge of the golf course, and that was rerouted into Cedar Ridge Drive here, which moved the access point up here from what was a point here, and that was not within the control of the Veneer family when that happened. But there was, the city did finance the construction of Edgewood Drive as a public safety enhancement to, again, provide that second point of access into the entrance to the subdivision. And then to mitigate concerns about having a second way in for development for emergency vehicles, there is a secondary emergency entrance from the Great Life parking lot over to Overlook Drive. And if you measure it directly without driving distance, it's about 1,200 feet south of the entrance. So based on the uniqueness of this property, the unique landlocked nature, the terrain and topography, this does have particular physical surroundings, shape, and topographic conditions that would create a hardship to the owner if the 600-foot requirement was strictly applied. As to the sidewalk request, there's an extensive network of interconnecting pedestrian trails that are owned and maintained by the association, and so that network provides residents with access to the recreation area, and it makes up for the fact that there would be sidewalks on only one side of the street because there's all kinds of walking paths and other alternatives for pedestrian activity. We're talking about a single block with 11 building lots. We would have the common area down here will be part of the final plat, but that will not be considered a building lot. All the lots shown have adequate frontage on and access to a public street. The dimensional requirements of both the R and RS district are met. There are several lots that have some severe slopes, particularly lots 3 and 4, but all the lots have an area where a permit could be issued to construct a home. There would be a need for creative site planning or some regrading on those lots. But the more rugged wooded areas are proposed to be preserved and protected by conservation easements. So one thing we want to avoid is having a platted lot that would never sell or can never be built upon because it doesn't have a suitable area to build. But with their shifting of the road and their reworking, we believe that a building permit could be issued on each of the lots as proposed. I think we've covered the water and sewer. It's our understanding that the applicants intend to try to finance the water and sewer improvements through the creation of a benefit district that would apply to Overlook Drive as well. The applicant's proposing to dedicate all the street right-of-way and improvements to the public for city maintenance. These are public streets. All utility and drainage easements would be public easements. There's a 15-foot access easement proposed to provide access to the Lower Meadow area, and there's already needed right-of-way for Marymount Road. As to the common areas, we don't need any pedestrian easements inside the common area because those are already available to the residents there. So all the infrastructure serving Phase 2 would be constructed up front. There will be no phasing. That would include the off-site water line. The cost of Overlook Drive and other public improvements inside River Run Estates would be borne by the developer or future property owners. And as we noted, property owners in River Run will be assessed for a portion of the cost of extending an off-site water line to Markley Road. The original developer, Mr. Veneer, prepared and recorded a set of covenants for the subdivision. There's an architectural control committee that has been used to establish private housing design requirements, and those would continue in the Phase 2 area. And then those covenants deal with the maintenance of common areas and natural areas within the subdivision. And so, as we noted, the Phase 2 area is subject to those covenants, which, as set up, cover the entire 94-acre original River Run development. So if you concur with staff's finding that Marymount Road is a direct access perimeter street that meets city standards, and if you believe the review requirements for preliminary plats have been satisfied, and that all policy and technical issues have been addressed to your satisfaction, and you wish to approve this preliminary plat application, we would recommend approval of the proposed preliminary plat, including the 2 requested variations to the subdivision regulations. And we're recommending that those be subject to the 8 conditions outlined on page 14 of the report. And a couple of those I would call out. The fire department has made note of the need to perform some additional maintenance and surfacing on the existing emergency access road. The rear portion of Lot 1 would be labeled as common area on the final plat, and that a second public water line connection to Markley Road shall be completed and operational prior to any vertical construction occurring in Phase 2. So those are some possible recommended conditions. In the alternative, you could postpone consideration of the plat if you feel like additional information is needed to take action on the plat. Again, Dustin, I guess if you could go back to the plat layout, I'll just point out what was determined at the neighborhood meeting but not reflected here, and if you could zoom in on Lot 1, Dustin. So in the notes from the neighborhood meeting, and as condition 7 in our conditions of approval, this portion, this right here is common area. The plan is to eliminate this line right here, extend the common area to here, and so Lot 1 would be reduced by that length, and this would be an extension of common area here with, again, these areas as you work your way around would be private conservation easements, which means, again, they're owned and within the confines of the lots that are purchased, but subject to a conservation easement, which limits development and would prevent us from issuing a permit for a shed or a garage or any other type of structure back there. And so there have been different questions about the status of the common areas, the locations of common areas, and I would just point out that in a new residential subdivision, there's usually a 2-step process. One involves conveying title of the common areas to the association, and today Veneer Properties is the association. The association has a single member, and then the second step would be the actual formation of the association, which would be having a board of directors, having a homeowners association meeting, electing officers, and setting up a functioning association. So at this point in time, the title to the common area in River Run has not been transferred to the River Run Homeowners Association, and the actual homeowners association has not been formed or conducted any meetings. Those are really outside the scope of the Planning Commission's purview. The purpose of today's preliminary plat is for the Planning Commission to review this and determine whether they have demonstrated that this is a feasible development. And so all those items that I identified and how they had been addressed and responded to by the applicant have helped us reach a conclusion that this is, this plan that's before you today is feasible to develop. And obviously, this is a preliminary plat, and they would have to come back with a final plat where some of these things related to the actual conservation easement language and those things would be pinned down at the final plat stage and recorded. So with that, I think our primary focus here is they've requested 2 variations that they're requesting that you approve. One is the maximum length of a dead-end street to be 2,370 feet, and the second is a variation from the requirement that sidewalks be constructed on both sides of a public street to allow sidewalks on only one side of Overlook Drive. So with that, I'd be open to any questions. There's probably a little more detail on the plat side than on the zoning side, so this is your chance to dive a little deeper if you would like.
Okay. Any questions for staff?
Dean, can you give me a really rough timeline of what it might take to get that water line in place?
Well, we do have our city attorney, Mr. Bankston, with us, but it is, I think he would tell you, and I would tell you, that it's primarily a function of how easy obtaining the necessary easements are from the owners upon which it would cross. So if we sent a part of the line was located on the Great Life Golf and Fitness property, Great Life Golf and Fitness would also benefit from these increased fire flows and also potentially from future connection to that line. So that we would not expect difficulty there, but then as we get south of that line into other properties getting over to that, it's going to be a matter of obtaining those easements. Then it's a matter of getting it designed, having that design approved, and hopefully timing it up with the benefit district that the developers have for their internal water, sewer, and streets. So it's going to be roughly in that same timeline of a infrastructure design for a subdivision, with the variable being how long does it take for the city to obtain easements to go across somebody else's property.
Thank you.
The applicants are aware that they can't do anything vertically in phase 2 till that is in place, just because of the need for the fire flows we have for the size of homes that are being built.
Okay. Mr. Lee? Have you had a chance to take a look at those 8 conditions?
We have,
And
yes.
you're okay with those
We
conditions?
are okay with
on
those
there?
conditions. I would like to point out one quick item. We do have a separate design review committee that we have written that'll be on file with Register of Deeds, primarily because what was written for Phase 1 was a blanket coverage, we believe, maybe even from another development, and some of the items in there were not feasible. So how we've written our design review board is very much in line with what was actually built in Phase 1. For example, being able to use asphalt shingle roofing. That was originally not allowed in the bylaws in Phase 1. Or having to have a side entrance garage. Some lots in Phase 1, that's literally all that could be built there. So there were some things logistically that had to be corrected. So we have written our own design review committee, and there are the 3 of us that will control that. So that will be under our own purview. So just wanted to clarify that, and we will get a copy of that turned in.
Okay. Any more questions for the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Lee. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Any public comment?
Sid Brentz, 1806 Stone Ridge Lane. The story's changed a lot since our meeting a month ago. I won't get into that. I have a question for Mr. Lee. Then are you guys bound by the Declaration of Covenants and Conditions?
We have our own declaration of covenants and conditions.
Okay. Dean, did Veneer Properties pay any of the specials for the roads on Phase 2 when they were put in? Or was that all paid by Phase 1?
So I thought I got those two numbers recorded into the report, but I'll try to see if I did or not. But what occurred with the development of Phase 1 was that a portion of those improvements, the off-site water line for that connected from Cedar Ridge Drive into the subdivision down Marymount, and also the improvements to Marymount Road itself, the portion that was attributable to Phase 2 was deferred for 15 years, and I believe 1 year ago, that 15-year period ended, and so now River Run Estates LLC has inherited those two assessments.
Picked up those assessments?
Yes.
And then the assessment for their own road, they'll pick up?
Right,
when-
so they have, the Phase 2 area got assessed the same as the Phase 1 area for the water line in Marymount Road and for Marymount Road itself. The difference being in Phase 1, the owners paid right away. In Phase 2, it was deferred for 15 years, and now Mr. Lee's group has stepped into those shoes, and they'll be paying those off over the next 15 years. If we can coordinate well, they would and should be able to roll those special assessments into the assessments that they would have for their internal improvements, because right now it's just a lump sum that's attributable to the Phase 2 area, and if we get individual lots in Phase 2, then we'll allocate those specials to the Phase 2 lots. So they'll, just like Phase 1, Phase 2 will have some assessments for off-site improvements and then their internal improvements.
But the secondary water line that was needed,
That is,
it
that's
was my
not,
understanding that was to have been put in years ago.
well, we thought it would be put in sooner than it was, and it's still not been put in, but at the time, no one thought it would take this long to get to Phase 2.
Okay, so there's really, with what the zoning board has recommended in their first, there's really not, we don't really have any say on that water line.
Other than when we get to that point and there's this discussion as it's set up now, the off-site water line over to Markley Road would be potentially benefiting every lot owner in Phase 1 and Phase 2. If there's some separate agreement by which Phase 2 absorbs all those costs, that's not out of the question, but as it stands now, everyone who owns property within the 94 acres originally owned by Veneer Properties is potentially could be assessed for the off-site second source of water. And
And
that,
there's no requirement that Phase 2.
there's no
enter into
requirement
a
that,
separate agreement.
right, or that they agree to absorb all those costs. They could, but they're not obligated to.
I understand your position on the common area. I take exception with the vote that was taken the other night because it was do you want me to break your right arm or your left arm? I'm going to break one of them. You just choose which one you want, because it's worded as a preference. It's not really giving you a third choice. What would you like to see? And I'm really troubled by the conservation easement and the lack of a definition. The declaration says no tree with a caliper of over 4 inches can be removed unless it's where your house is going to sit. And the restriction on there that you can't build a building is totally different than what the declaration says and what the common area requires. The common area says if it impedes the growth of another tree, or if it's dangerous, dead, or diseased, you can remove it, but otherwise it stays. And if you go up there and look at those lots and really look at them, if you want a view, you're going to have to pretty much clear cut some of that area. And that was what was never intended, because it was always in the common area. And now we're putting this, quote, conservation easement on it that no one seems to understand. And Mr. Leah says, well, there won't be any buildings back there. Well, that's not a conservation easement. That may be a building restriction, but that's all that is. And so I think I can speak for at least the 4 of us on the back row, or 5 of us on the back row. That wasn't what we understood the other night and hasn't been represented. So that's very troubling to all of us.
So I guess my best response to that is that we're going to work with River Run Estates and their council. We're going to look at the existing language that's in the covenants. We're going to look to guidance from other sources, and if and when a final plat comes back, the plan is that we will have something beyond the word conservation easement labeled on the lots. There will be a note placed on the face of the plat that will explain what the conservation easement means and what it allows and does not allow, and to get the language as precise as possible and get it lettered right on the face of the plat. So hopefully, if and when we get to a final plat, we will have some language that we will work with multiple parties on to share and to say this is the language. And so the idea is, it may not be equivalent, but the idea is that the conservation easement would be a substitute for the common area status, and it would similarly protect the undeveloped areas in a way that would be consistent with the original common area intent. The difference being that the conservation easement belongs to the individual owner and is not open or available to all the residents in the subdivision. That's the primary distinction. Our goal would be to get to language in the conservation easement itself that is satisfactory to the developers, to the Phase 1 owners, and to staff that will hopefully be aware of and enforcing that in the future, and to get it well documented so it's not just 2 words, but there is language that explains what it allows and doesn't allow. And the first place to look is the language in the existing covenants and restrictions to carry that over. But again, the goal is that it provide equivalent protection. The distinction is that it's under the ownership of individual owners and not area that's accessible to all the homeowners in River Run. That's the distinction.
Okay. Any more public comment?
Sydney Soderberg, 1628 Overlook Drive. I just have a clarification. Did you say that Mr. Veneer retains ownership of the meadow?
That is correct. And Dustin, I've got a highlighted plat that I gave you to perhaps put up on the screen, and it's not part of today's item, but Mr. Veneer Properties owns the meadow, but I wanted, so we have people from Phase 1 here, But when we talk about transferring ownership of the common area, right over here, this line from here extending off the page, this is the meadow area here. These areas that I have highlighted are areas on the Phase 1 plat that were designated as common area for the ownership, use, management of the homeowners association. So we've been focused heavily on getting this common area transferred from Veneer Properties to the HOA, but we also, at the same time, need to be cognizant of the fact that this area here, which is also common area and has a detention pond and walking paths and others, that area also needs to be described and transferred over to the HOA. So it's the 29-acre meadow plus this area. Everything that I have here highlighted is in the Phase 1 plat, and it is common area, and it also has not been transferred to the HOA. That it doesn't have anything to do with the Phase 2 plat we're discussing, other than the fact that the Phase 1 owners should rightfully be concerned that we not forget about this area also being transferred to the HOA. So.
Okay.
Clarify what Dean said. You said the sewer and I think the streets were going to be assessed to Overlook Drive. Is that correct?
The internal improvements, the Overlook Drive extension, the water line extension, and the sanitary sewer, they will form a benefit district. That benefit district will consist of these 11 lots, and only these 11 lots will be assessed for those improvements. What remains to be seen is what sort of cost we end up with the off-site water line. But everything associated with running a water line through here, building the street, running a sewer line up to this manhole, those will be assessed only to the Phase 2 lots. But as I explained to Mr. Ritz, this property, as it sits right now, has already been assessed for Marymount Road and an off-site water line in Marymount Road. So this property is already carrying some special assessments, and these will be added to that.
Okay.
And what we generally do is when we have an area that's unplatted and it has assessments on it, and then we plat it, we go in and we prorate the lump sum assessment and assign an assessment to each of the lots, either based on their size or their frontage or equal per lot. But we will take those lump sums for the water line and Marymount Road, and then each of the people that buy or own one of these lots will then get a proportionate share of it. Right now, River Run Estates has 2 lump sum assessments that were deferred for 15 years but are now under payment.
Okay. Any more public comment? Dustin, is anybody online?
We do not have anyone online.
Okay. If there's no more questions for staff or for the applicant, I'll bring it back up to the commission. We want to make sure that we do, when we make a motion, that it will include the 2 variations that were asked for and the 8 conditions also.
And I do want to point out, for the benefit of those here, that should this be approved as a preliminary plat, they will have to come back with a final plat, and when they come back with a final plat, we'll also be providing notice to the adjoining and neighboring property owners so that they can return when the Planning Commission considers the final plat.
Okay.
So
You had something you needed to add there?
it's a
Mr. Lee?
2-step process.
Just again, the meeting we held with the homeowners was a courtesy. It was not something required. It was something that we did in an effort to be good neighbors. And, we went through in great detail what was common space, which would now be owned by individuals, that would now be something left and not built upon to preserve a natural view. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on what our intention there is that that will be a space where no structures will be built, and it will be a natural space, but not bound by any common space guidelines because it is not common space. I just wanted to make sure that was very, very clear on our intention.
Thank you. So I'll bring it back up to commission for some action.
I'll make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve application number PO3-44D with the 2 requested variations and the 8 conditions on page 14.
I'd second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and second on the floor to approve application P03-4D. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And that carries 6-0. Thank you. Okay, that brings us into Dean, no legislative matters.
We don't have any legislative text amendments for you to consider today. We don't have any administrative items, and we don't have any preliminary discussion items. In terms of other business, we would want to share with you that on your meeting on the 20th, that will be a study session and training session and new member orientation session. And so we will start early, probably at 2:30, perhaps at 3, where we will have a study session and training session. And then your regular meeting will be the election of officers for the coming year, chair, vice chair, and then each year we seek an individual who will agree to serve on the Board of Zoning Appeals as a Planning Commission representative and on the Heritage Commission as the Planning Commission's representative. So those will be the things that will be discussed on the 20th. And then we will have another meeting October 4th where we've got 3 items scheduled for your consideration.
Okay. And I see nobody out there for public forum. No unfinished or other business, I guess, on that there. So I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much, guys.